Hi guys. So this is my second video that I will be putting onto YouTube. I have a outline, but I do not have a script, so please bear with me. If a few times, from time to time, it seems like maybe I'm kind of winging it. So, how to play Guild Wars 2 is a bit of a inaccurate way of describing it, but it kind of gets the gist. What I'm looking at is kind of trying to differentiate what Guild Wars 2 offers from what other MMOs offer. And in this case, it's going to be a lot of the little differences that might really throw a new player, where they come into the game and they don't get how it works. When I first started playing, in the very first public beta, for the first hour or so, I was so lost I thought I'd wasted my money in pre ordering. And it took a couple of hours for all the systems to sort of make sense. So, I'm going to try and help you through that first bit. Now, Guild Wars 2 is a massively multiplayer online role playing game like most of the others. It is free to play from what was originally released as the core game. It has a few minor little things. You can only have 2 characters instead of 5. You're limited in the number of bags you can carry. You have certain communication limitations, so you can't create a new account and spam for gold selling, that kind of thing. But if you want to find out if it's a game you like or not, it is free, free, free. It has some very different mechanics, and that can be really off putting to a player who's played more standard MMOs, your WoW, your Final Fantasy 14, Latro, Star Wars The Old Republic, all of those. It has, superficially, it looks quite similar, but the differences are, I'm going to say, a lot of times pretty profound. Significant. The hotbars look the same like any other hotbars, but they're not quite. Now, the end game also is different. It has some parts of endgame that are similar to other MMOs, but in the long term, the game has less guidance through both the leveling and certainly the end game than most other MMOs. It doesn't have really standard quests. It has a lot of similar mechanics provided by reputation hearts. There are storyline quests that open up every 10 levels, a series of quests that tell your personal story as your character grows and grows more powerful. At the end game, you have a lot of options. There's SPVP, which is 5 on 5. There is World v World, which is very large groups, 50 or more. 3 different factions running around fighting each other in the open world. Um, there are fractals, which are similar to dungeons and, in essence, the WoW's Mythic Plus. They took a lot of their ideas from the way Guild Wars 2 implements fractals. In PvE, there is raids, there is dungeons, although dungeons have been largely deprecated. There is an enormous amount of open world PvE gameplay, and that's very different from most other games. The biggest difference in the end game from other MMORPGs is while it has a lot of options, and that's true in other games as well, they don't really point you at any. The way I describe it is you have to make your own fun. You have to find which parts of the game you enjoy and embrace those and seek those out mostly on your own. The lack of guidance at the end game is something that throws a lot of people, understandably. So you kind of have to take the initiative and figure it out on your own. Lastly, one thing that's very different from all those other games is its horizontal progression at the end game. The cap was level 70 when the game came out. Sorry, level 80. Don't know what I'm thinking. And it's still the cap. And if you had gear after the first year of play and you've left and come back today, that gear is still relevant, useful. There has been a very small amount of power creep, but less than 10%. I believe it was 10% for weapons and 5% for armor. If you went from the old exotic that you could get early on in the game to ascended or legendary, it's a 10% increase in the damage, base numbers and 5% for armor for stats and stuff. So a tiny bit of creep, but at the end game, you don't have to worry about that. There is no part of the end game except very high end fractals where you have to have ascended gear or better. Exotic is fine. Now, I'll be going into some of the basic mechanics. The combat does support tab targeting, but that's not the end of it. It also has elements of action gaming. So when you move around, it's similar to a standard MMO. You've got WASD movement, but you also have things like dodging to get out of an enemy attack or get into a special effect in time, get behind cover, and you can dodge. Forward and back. And you note here, this is the endurance gauge that controls. You have to have, now I can dodge once, and it slowly regenerates. Different classes, professions, and specs will have other tools or buffs to increase the speed that this regenerates. So that's dodging and endurance. There's also, instead of just when you run out of hit points, you die, like in most MMOs, you go into what is called the down state. And you still have a limited number of options you can do while you're down. A little bit of offense, you can heal. I will show you what those look like. In this case, no. These are your down skills. So this character can do a little bit of damage, can move to a different location, all while staying down, can summon a temporary mob, and can heal yourself. So if you're not being attacked and you've been reduced to 0 hit points, you can bandage, and over time, you can heal yourself all the way up. If you're fighting a mob, and that mob's on very low hit points, and you're targeting it and hitting it, and it dies, you automatically res. Go back into combat. You have half health, but you can continue on going. So, this is the down state. It's very different from most other MMOs. Your gameplay options are not done just because you've run out of life. Now, even if you get killed, if your down state bar goes to 0, and there are other players around, they can res you, and you can res any player who's down to speed that up. If you stand over them at any downed character and you hit the F button, they'll start healing. And that'll even work on a dead character, although it works much more slowly. But you can do that in combat, and you will often see that in open world events where there's dozens or hundreds of people. Somebody gets downed, a couple people run over, they hit their F, boom, he's back up, and everybody's back in the fight again. Now, in most games, you choose your class. I'm going to use WoW as the example. You choose your class as a mage. You get fireball, and ice spells, and this and that. That's not exactly the way it works here. In Guild Wars 2, you can wield 2 sets of weapons at a time. You can have a one-hander and an off-hander, or you can have a two-hander. And you can have 2 sets at a time, and you can swap between them. And here's the swap. Outside of combat, you can swap freely. You'll note these skills are changing. Or, well, some of them are. The reason is here, I'm going with 2 different one-handed or off-handed weapons. I am wielding a dagger in the main hand and a focus in the offhand, or a torch in the offhand. A 2-handed weapon will give you 5 skills here. A one-handed weapon will give you 3, and the off-handed weapon will give you 2. And we're changing off-handed weapons here, so the only skills that change are the 4 and 5. But the damage you do, the buffs and debuffs you do, the healing you do, everything you do is defined by the in the 1 through 5 skills are defined by the weapons you use, not just by your class. So this class is a mesmer. They are sort of like an illusionist. They create illusions that attack, or they can also create, in the case of this specialization, they have illusionary daggers that they can use their mind to throw. But the skills themselves depend on the weapons. So if I want, I can change, I'll just show you here. These are the sword skills. The offhand sword, axe, dagger, greatsword is two-handed, uses all 5 skill slots. Pistol, scepter, staff, focus, torch offhand, shield offhand. And then underwater, you have your own skills. They have a spear and a trident here. There is fighting underwater as well in the game. Now, every class will have a class mechanic, and that goes up here. These are going to be your F skills. In this particular case, it's throwing these daggers over my head. In other cases, it might be causing my illusions to attack and explode, doing extra damage or putting debuffs on them. And they all have different effects. This one just does damage and it pierces. This one does damage and also gives them bleeds. And if you can see it, the writing in blue, those are additional effects I've gained from changes in my specialization. And this one does a daze, and this one does some defensive stuff, gives you 2 seconds of blocking all attacks. So, your weapon or weapons determine your 1 through 5 skills. The 6 through 10 skills, generally, there are a few exceptions in the way classes work. The 6th skill will always be a heal for you and or your party. 7 through 9 are what are called utility skills. Those come from a large variety. These are the selection of utility skills this class and spec have. And you can mix and match these on the fly. As long as you're not in combat, you can change them out. So, you know, that last encounter, you needed extra defense. Well, you slotted up a defensive skill. Now you're going to want protection so that you don't get knocked down. You're going to look for a skill that has stability, which is a buff that keeps you from knocked down, and so on. So these can be changed anytime you're not in combat. Lastly, we have the elite skill, which is a far more powerful or effective skill, usually on a much longer cooldown. And those are the skill bars. This right here is for mounts. If you have the expansion where you get mounts, that's where the mounts are. Here is your buff bar, and also eventually your debuff bar. So those are how the skills work. And you'll note particularly the weapon part can be very off-putting and really throw a person as to how that works. Because they're used to being, I'm a mage, I can throw a fireball. Well, in this case, you can't necessarily throw a fireball unless, you have all of the setup to be throwing fireballs. In the case of an elementalist, they can be in fire, earth, wind, or air. If you're in the fire stance, you can throw fireballs. If you're in the air stance, you can throw lightning bolts. And every class has these little changes to it. In this case, the F skills are what to do with these blades. Next up is the spec system. This is different. This looks really complicated. It's not so much. This is how you'll learn your skills. You can see the displays here if you want to check and see what your skills do. But this is where the skills are aligned into specializations. This is where it's trained. Now, this is broken up into 3 areas, and I just want to acquaint you with it. Here is where you learn the skills you learn. You start out with a very basic number of skills. All of the utility skills and healing skills and elite skills are going to come from this. You have 5 lines of skills. In this case, it's signets, mantras, manipulation, glamour, and illusions. And as you level up, you'll gain hero points. And you can also gain additional hero points through the world. There are points where you can defeat a monster or commune with a place and get additional points. You'll train up all of these, so you get access to all of the healing, utility, and elite specs. You'll also have 5 lines of specializations. Domination, dueling, chaos, inspiration, and illusions in this case. And what that does, it gives you access to the actual builds. As you level up, you'll get 3 lines of spec to open up, and you'll get to choose what to put. You'll note here 5 specializations. That is these 5 lines. And when you choose one and level up the specialization, you'll start getting things like these traits. Some active, mostly passive. And you'll get a choice of 3 here. You get this. You get a choice of 3. You get this. You get a choice of 3. You get this. A choice of 3. And these increase in power as you move left or right. And these can significantly change the way your build plays. You especially want to pay attention to things that interact with each other in sort of a cumulative fashion. Over time, it becomes more powerful because this causes this effect, and this effect causes that effect, and this causes this to do more damage, and these things can add up over time to really define your spec. The third area here after skills and specializations is elite specializations, and these are unlocked in the expansions. They can only fit in the bottom line. So, this can only have the 5 original specializations. This can only have the 5 original. This can have one of the 5 original and any one elite specialization. In this case, it's the Virtuoso. So this character can use Virtuoso or Mirage. Hasn't got Chronomancer yet. And again, this is the elite specializations change the way this the class plays, often by a very, very large amount. For instance, in the case of Ranger, the Druid specialization is primarily healing. Ranger is about pets and mostly ranged attacks, not exclusively. But if you choose to go with the Druid, again, it's a nature attunement kind of thing, so it makes sense for Ranger. That's going to change your way you play that character. It's going to be a lot more healing based. So the combination of the specializations you choose and any elite specialization, plus the weapons you choose to equip, is kind of how you play. What differentiates it from just being a class and skill based is that sort of interrelation between those different factors. Next, I'm going to do a quick look at gear, how gear works in the game. You've got 6 pieces of armor. You've got your weapons. You've got backpack, accessories, rings, and an amulet, and you've got underwater stuff. This is used for harvesting raw materials for crafting. Each of these will have a number of stats. In this case, power, vitality, and condition damage. This is a condition spec that it's meant to do damage through inflicting damage over time, bleeds, setting somebody on fire, that kind of thing. Power is basically an increase of effectiveness of your skills and abilities. Vitality increases your hit points. Condition damage increases the amount of damage your conditions do. Each piece of armor here, we have put a rune in. That's in the blue writing. And depending on how many runes you have, you'll get the 6 tiers of effects. You'll always, essentially, at the end game, want to have a full set of runes. In this case, it's increasing condition damage, power. There are also signets in the weapons that will also change things up. In this case, bleeding happens when you critically hit. In this case, when you swap weapons, it gives everybody around you a bleed. And this one also does the bleeding for 6 seconds. So, every time I swap from either of these, it activates the dagger, does bleeding to everything. And this over here, every time I crit, gives bleeding to everything that I hit. Critical hits make bleeds. I swap makes bleeds. All of my skills, I've got conditions on them, although not currently in this build. And so that's how you rack up your condition damage. And here are the stats. You've got power, toughness, which increases your armor. You've got vitality, health, precision, critical chance, ferocity, critical damage, condition damage, expertise, which increases the duration of your conditions, concentration, that increases the duration of the boons you cast, and it's extremely important for support classes. A lot of the boons that you give to other players, things like defense or quickness or fury, all of these have very good positive effects. Generally, they only last for a few seconds. So increasing your boon duration and having more skills that give your allies those skills can allow you to keep complete uptime on a lot of the buffs. And at the end game, that's what the people are looking for. And agony resistance is used in fractals. Magic find here. So that's a quick rundown on the stats. Now, one other thing I want to cover is that at the end game, it has become popular in the last few weeks, and it's about damn time. A lot of streamers and build websites that specialize in builds that you might want to have for your class have introduced what are called low-intensity builds. These are meant especially for people with any sort of disability that makes it difficult for them to game. For instance, a player who plays with one hand who's lost an arm is an example. There is a guy who raids who I believe only has a mouth and breath tube to play the game. And so these sort of builds are designed in mind with people either who are not very good at video games, or people who have a physical disability, or people who just want a less intense game style. And that's a low intensity build. And those are builds specifically meant not to maximize damage or support or whatever function, but instead to maximize the damage or support or whatever with the minimum number of button pushes, in essence. Some of them are as simple as run up to the boss, hit the 1 key. And that's all it requires. Recently there was one that, for engineers, mechanists, they have a pet robot, run up and equip the bomb kit and just press the button 1. And you will auto attack for a large amount of damage over time. That's what a LI build is, and that is an extremely good starting point for a new player when they reach the end game. Because it's very easy to reach the end game and find yourself outmatched, especially when you go into the expansion spaces. The expansions, they turned up the dial for difficulty a bit, especially in Heart of Thorns. And you can find yourself with a build that was capable of sort of, muddling through the story through level 80, and you get to the expansion spaces, and everything is murdering. A low-intensity build is a good introduction to how the mechanics play well together to make your character play better. And I think it's a really good entry point for a new player at the end. I'm going to show you the Hero tab now. You've seen it a little bit. On the left-hand side, this is the primary tab. There are tabs here along the left-hand side. And there's a lot here. We'll come back to that in a second. The build gives you information about your skills and your traits, and is also where you set your spec. Training is where you expend your hero points to learn while you're leveling up the character to gain new skills and abilities. The story journal. My story is your personal story. Living World Season. The expansions. So my story takes you all the way through the core game. Then you've got Living World Season 1, 2, the first expansion, Living World Season 3, second expansion, Living World Season 4, Iceberg Saga, and now End of Dragons. They have just added today Scarlet's War, which is that is the summary of what was Living World Season 1. They have just brought back the first episode of Living World Season 1 today. And that's free for everyone. The other Living World seasons are currently only available through purchase. That is an example of where the free-to-play no longer holds. The expansions and Living World Seasons 2 through 4 and Iceberg Saga. Next up, this is crafting. This character has only done a little bit of tailoring. You can have 2 crafting skills out of 8 or 10 on any given character. Crafting can be useful. It gives you experience for leveling up, as well as being able to make your own gear. There are a number of tiers of it. I won't go into any great detail other than to say that if you're going to try and level it up, I suggest you check out a guide, as a guide will point you at the fastest way to level it up with the least use of materials, so that you have the rest of your materials for making practical things for your characters or even selling. Next up is the achievements. There are a huge, vast, really big number of achievements in Guild Wars 2, and for some people, this is the end game. It's just chasing achievements. And here we have masteries. This is more horizontal progression. Each expansion has its own mastery path, as does End of Dragons. And these can increase generally quality of life. They're not necessarily things that are going to make you any more powerful. As an example of where it really shines is Path of Fire. This is where your mounts, after you gain your mounts become, they could jump farther, survive more, gain special abilities, stuff like that. It's not really power. It is more just quality of life stuff. Now we'll go to the main tab. This is equipment. I already showed you this. This is the stuff that's currently in your inventory that you might want to swap in place. And these are the gear pieces that I described. The build, not here, back up. The wardrobe. This allows you to change your appearance of your weapons or gear. So for instance, in this case, we're looking at the Darkwing Torch. I pull it out. That's what it looks like. I have it selected. These are all the things I could make it look like differently. And as you can see, there's a wide variety of them. Some of them quite flashy, some quite plain. Now, you won't start out with this many. Basically, every time you get a new item that you don't have the cosmetic of before, haven't had the cosmetic of before, it unlocks. And that's how you gain access to more cooler cosmetics. It's that simple. It does cost a transmutation charge, which you'll gain over time. I have 651 to change the appearance of an outfit, of an item, I should say. So if I wanted to change all of my armor pieces to look different, well, that's going to set me back 6 of those charges. Next up is outfits. Outfits are similar, but instead of changing an item that you're wearing, your hat, your shoes, this is an outfit, and an outfit is an entire set of gear. You can turn off the headpiece. I think is the only thing you change about it. And so this is the way they look. They're all going to look significantly different. These ones are currently inheriting my current dye scheme, which is why some of them do not look particularly good. Like, say, that one. And some of them are a little more informal. There we go. So that's outfits. And again, these you will gain over time or purchase through the gem store. That's how the game makes money instead of subscription. There is a gem store with some convenience items, quality of life items, but mostly it's cosmetics. Next up is dyes. Re-dyeing outfits, very simple. You can see here the outfit itself has 4 dye channels. And you can change those dyes as much as you want. You start with these dyes, you'll gain common dyes, uncommon dyes, and rare dyes through play. Exclusive dyes come, again, through either purchase or acquisition. And a lot of this stuff, by the way, is also purchasable for gold because someone else has it and they're selling it at the auction house. So it's not all real money currency items. As you can tell, I have a lot of dyes. You can't do your fashion right without dyes. Glider skins. If you have Heart of Thorns expansion, you'll get a glider early on. There are skins for that. Again, also dyeable. Mounts. If you have Path of Fire or End of Dragons. End of Dragons will give you 3 mounts. It'll give you the Raptor mount, the Bunny mount, and I believe the Skimmer mount. Not full function. They don't have all of the masteries that give them full function, but it is it allowed them to do design stuff in the game that required mounts. Previously, if you didn't have mounts, you would have had no way to get to things if you bought the newest expansion. There are 3, 6, 9 mounts, and again, we've got skins for all of them. Every mount has different abilities. It's one of the strengths of the game. It's a great addition that came in Path of Fire. This one can jump the mount. The Raptor can jump horizontally. The Bunny mount, as we call it, can jump vertically. This mount can skim across the water, or lava, or quicksand. It can also dive into water if you've got the mastery high enough. This one can do short teleports and use sand portals, which are long teleport place to place in Path of Fire maps. This one is extraordinarily fast on straightaways. This one is the World v World mount, only really useful there. This one has a type of flying, very, very fast, but you have to start from a high point. This one is something more like regular flying, although it's not endless where you can go up forever or anything. You kind of have to work with your momentum. And they added the turtle in the new expansion, and that is a multiplayer, two-player combat usable now. You also have fishing in the latest expansion, skiffs in the latest expansion, boats. Novelties, which are little gimmicky things like having this make it look like you're floating in the air, having a kite flying from you looking like a critter. These are just sort of like what toys are in WoW. Miniatures are non-combat pets that follow you around. If the map is busy, these will get turned off so that they don't kill everyone's frames. Finishers are PvP and World v World. They are some of them are absolutely hilariously funny. That if you finish somebody in that game mode, they get an animation over them to taunt them. I like it much better than, say, teabagging. And mail carriers are used every time you send or receive mail. So that is the hero tab. There's a lot of stuff going on, but none of it is going to be overwhelming to you because you only need one of them at a time. Next up, we've got the story. I covered that a little bit. You start with your story, and over time, that will lead you throughout the core world, and then the expansions come on, and each of them has an ongoing storyline as well. In the end game, as I've described, you have the open world, you have SPVP, you have World v World, you have raids, fractals, and more of that stuff is being added all the time. But, as I mentioned earlier, it is stuff you will have to find. The monetization can throw a lot of people. Expansions cost, Living World Season stuff costs. And then there's this. It's the Black Lion Trading Company. And here is where they want to put up stuff that you want to buy for real money. Now, it's not exclusively for real money. If you want something that's only available here, you can exchange gold for gems or gems for gold. So, money goes in, it buys gems. Gems can be used to buy items from the Black Lion Trading Company, and then start again. You buy gems for real money. You can buy items from the Black Lion Trading Company, or you can exchange it for gold. If you have gold in the game, you can buy the gems, and that gives you access to everything on the Black Lion Trading Company. So, cash can get you Black Lion Trading Company or gold. Gold can get you Black Lion Trading Company. There's no cash out in the monetization. The trading post itself is like any auction house, generally speaking, but for any given item, say this item, there is the current price that people are trying to buy it for and the price they're trying to sell it for. In this case, it's pretty close. 8 gold, 30 silver, only a difference of 26 copper. So basically, this item has, over time, has equalized where the supply and demand are just about the same, and they agree on a sales point. Sometimes that's not the case. This thing here, for instance, is selling for 59 silver difference. And so the busier an item is in sales and purchase and in perceived value, there is actually give and take in the market. Now, there is a skim on every exchange of, I believe, 15%. So if you sell something for 10 gold, you're only going to get 8.5 gold back. That is one of the few faucets in the game to kind of remove the currency. So, you want to play. I've been talking about how the game differs. Now I'm going to talk about how you make that choice at the very beginning. So I'm going to log out to character select, and I'm going to create a new character. First thing you do is you choose race, and it doesn't really matter. It has no battle effect, no combat effects, no real game effect, with tiny exception in that you get a few racial skills that basically never get used. They're for a little bit of flavor. They don't have any significant effect. You never see them in the end game. I can't remember ever using one for anything other than a very short period of time while leveling. So the race really doesn't matter as far as the game is concerned. The only other difference the race makes is in your personal story. Personal stories will differ for about the first 20 levels. At level 10, you get a personal story. At level 20, you get another chapter of the personal story. At level 30, the personal stories start to run together. So a Char will get a different story from a human, from a Norn, Sura, or Sylvari for about 20 plus levels. So choose any race you want. Again, gender doesn't matter. Male or female, same deal. The only thing that'll matter, change, is your voice. The voice of your character is dependent on your race and sex. So there's 10 different voice options. Now comes the big choice. I'll come back to that. After you'll choose your class, you'll be able to choose your appearance, your body, your height, your physique, in this case, fur options, head options, hair color, accessory color, face options, horns, face details. Now you can use eyes, ears and head, muzzle and nose, and these have sliders to give you more choices, and your initial dye colors for your armor. Mesmer's mask. This is essentially just cosmetic. This was an element that was in the original game and still appears somewhat, but it's nothing you need to worry about. I would just go with whatever flavor you want. This will choose parts of your personal story. It'll vary by race as to what your choices are going to be when you get out here. In this case, which legion you serve under. And here you choose who your sparring partner is, and again, this affects your personal story. Each of these options will change up those personal stories a little bit. But it will depend on which race you're choosing. For humans, in fact, as an example, you choose as to whether you're streets to common folk or the nobility, and you choose which of three options. One of them is, I wish I'd joined the circus, I never worked for my sister, and I don't know who my real parents are. And each of those, again, change the personal story. And here's another one of those. You're choosing who your father was. Again, changing the personal story. And lastly, you get a name. So, the only thing you've still got to choose, keep in mind that those, other than story, have no game effect. So, we've got 3 heavy armor classes, Warrior, Guardian, and Revenant. 3 medium, Ranger, Thief, and Engineer. And 3 light, Necromancer, Elementalist. We'll start at the top. Warrior. They're mostly melee. They have a Fury meter as their class effect, their class mechanic. Basically, the more more fighting they do, you build it up, you unleash it in a special attack. Again, this is using the F skills that are above your weapons. They have an enormous number of choices in weapon, the most in the game. They can use almost any weapon in the game. In the end game, they are popular, but they're limited. They're often chosen for what is called a banner slave. One of your skills is the ability to drop certain banners. Those buff all members of the team. They're very strong, and it keeps the warrior in the end-game play. There are 3. Every class has 3 elite specs now, one from each of the expansions. The first one is Berserker. The mechanic is pretty straightforward. It is basically an amplification of that rage mechanic. You can go berserk, and the longer you stay in berserk, the more damage you do. The second one is Spellbreaker, which is primarily a debuffer. in the end game, it's not in a great place right now. They're working on it. I hope Spellbreaker players are hoping to see some buffs in the near future. And the third one is Bladesworn, and that the specialty is the Gunblade or Gun Saber. Can't remember. Gun Saber, I think it's called. Basically, and it is a very, very hard-hitting mechanic, but it's one that requires you to stand in place for a second. You can put up blocks to defend yourself. You can teleport short distances, but you have to wait to strike. Strike, though, you do huge amounts of damage. So that's one of the things that makes that particular specialization fun. The next profession is Guardian. Sort of like a paladin in a lot of sort of standard games. Your mechanic is virtues. You have a virtue that can set enemies on fire, another one that can provide healing, and another one that gives defense, I think block to you and your friends at the core level. They are damage, but they can heal, and they can buff. They're capable of all content. They are the universally good at everything class right now. In the end game, in essence, you can find a Guardian specialization that's good in every single game. A lot of people hate on the Guardian because it seems to be always in a good place design. The 3 specs it has at the end game, if you have the expansions, are Dragon Hunter, which added ranged, the longbow, to the Guardian. Every specialization, every elite specialization, adds a new weapon that the class didn't have. So, just to note that for Guardian, Dragon Hunter, that was the bow. The bow itself is underwhelming. The Dragon Hunter itself, however, is very, very good burst DPS. Firebrand expansion, or Firebrand came out in Heart of Thorns. It is the strongest single spec in the game right now. It's good for damage, it's good for healing, it's good for buffing. And a lot of times it's good for damage or healing and buffing at the same time. Firebrand right now is the most overpowered spec in the game. The new expansion brought Willbender, which is wielding the ability to dual wield swords, sword in the offhand. It is a mobility based spec primarily. It has changed the virtues into movement skills. And so it's a very different kind of spec. I have not played it extensively, despite the fact that Guardian is my most played spec. Willbender seems to be a good DPS spec and has some buffing ability. I'm not sure if it has any heal in the new spec. Revenant will only be available if you have Heart of Thorns. It's the only expansion-based spec that was added to give us 3 heavies to go with 3 mediums and 3 lights, because the game did not have Revenant at launch. Revenant, they contact spirits of great and powerful beings from the past. Anything from a dragon to an assassin, and so on. When they use, they can have 2 of these spirits equipped at any one time and swap between them during combat. Again, you can change which spirits you're currently attuned to outside of combat. And they do not have any choices when it comes to utility skills, the 6 through 10 skills. They will always get the skills dependent on which spirit they're in. That's how their class mechanic works. They have an energy-based mechanic. They start at 50%. Skills will either add to or reduce it, and it's a very common playstyle for it to be start in one spirit stance. You do a bunch of skills, your energy goes down to 0. When it hits 0, you swap to the other one, and that puts your energy back at 50. That continues. That's a pretty standard rotation for Revenant. The original Revenant elite spec was Herald, which is primarily a buffing or healing spec. Pardon me. In the elite spec, anyway, primarily buffing, basically allowing you to run 2, 3, 4, 5 buffs at once for everyone in your group for a different amount of time based on the skills you're using. So, the second one was Renegade, short bow, very, very good. Still very, very strong in the meta is an Alack Ren. Alacrity, one of the buffs. You give that out to your group. Renegade is the spec. And the short bow allows it to do a lot of damage and a lot of buffing. The third one is the new one, the Vindicator. It's a 2-in-1 ancient spirit, allowing you to swap between those two separately from an additional spirit. One of them is a healer, one of them is a damager. My understanding is the damage spec seems to be pretty good. I'm not sure about the healing spec right now. It has a very strange dodge mechanic in that you actually leave the game board for a second. Basically, you jump into the mists and then land back down, either doing damage or buffs or heals around you. Next up is the Ranger. And the Ranger is a pet class, the only straightforward pet class, kind of the classical kind of pet class. It specializes in pets and spirits, and has a lot of ranged options. Short and long bow, axes. I actually like the axes. The first elite spec for them was Druid, primarily a healing spec. Strong for healing, not great for anything else. The second one was Soul Beast, that allows you to merge with your pet, gaining some of the pet abilities. Also then allowing your abilities which normally work on the pet to work on you, to buff you as well. The new one is Untamed. Untamed is in a bad place. Basically no one is playing Untamed right now, at least in any sort of content where people... it's fine for open world. All the classes and specs are fine for open world. But it's underperforming right now in any sort of group activity, whether that's fractals or raids or PvP. It needs work. It's the only one I would say is in a bad place right now. Thief. The classic Thief. It is what you would expect. It's an assassin type class. It's a stealth class, although not stealth in class in like WoW or Contra, where you stealth up and you stay there forever. In this case, it's you can stealth for a few seconds, taking yourself out of combat, moving to another place, that kind of thing. It has an initiative mechanic similar to an energy type system where you start with a certain number of initiative and an attack will use up some initiative, but you can spam that attack as much as you want until you run out of initiative. So it has sort of this spike type gameplay where you get into position, you do a bunch of damage with a bunch of attacks, and then you maybe stealth and wait for your initiative to regenerate a little bit. That kind of gameplay. The first one of those, the first flavor of those for the elites was the Daredevil, which is staff-based. It is a high mobility class. It gets a third dodge. It's the only class with 3 dodges. And it used a staff. Very good, very solid gameplay right now. The second one was Deadeye, which added the rifle. It has certain game uses. Again, it's a heavy damage, low mobility. Although personally I prefer pistol, at least for open world play. The third one, the newest one, is Spectre, which has some new to the game mechanics of targeted healing. It has good damage support, and my understanding is it does good damage itself. I haven't been able to get the rotation to work for myself yet. That's a me thing, not necessarily a you thing. Next up is Engineer. Engineer is a very unusual class. The class mechanic on that one is, in large part, is kits. That's sort of the strongest thing. It's for any of their utility skills, you can swap in a kit, which will change your 1 through 5 skills. So you have a weapon or main hand offhand. You can't swap in combat with an engineer, but you can swap in a completely new bar with a kit. Flamethrowers, bombs, grenades, healing. There are a bunch of different kits you can use to really change how the class plays. It makes it a very, very interesting, flexible class, but it can be a lot for a new player to deal with. The first elite spec on that for the endgame was Scrapper, which added gyros and a two-handed hammer. It's a very solid build, flamethrower Scrapper, still very strong. The second one added Holosmith. It's a lightsaber. It is another one that has an interesting overload mechanic, where you initiate a heating up, and the hotter you get, the more damage you do, but if you don't turn off the heating and reach the end, it explodes and you take damage. But you want to get close to it and try and stay there. The third one is Mechanist, which adds a big-ass robot. The big-ass robot is very strong now in a lot of the PvE modes. It's melee damage, range damage, or healing, and has buffs as well, especially in the heal bot. Where that works is working very well in a lot of PvE content. In PvP, it's a weak class simply because they target your bot. Your bot dies, and that just means that most everything you've set up the class to do no longer has access to the bot. You've become very, very, very weak. So, not great in PvP, really good in PvE right now. Next up, the Necromancer. Necromancer is sort of a pet class. You can choose to run it as a pet class, but you don't really have any control over your pets. They're going to attack what you attack, but you can't tell them to attack something without attacking it yourself. You can't tell them to use special abilities so much. But you don't have to run pets at all. In fact, most people don't. It is great for leveling. A Minion Mancer, basically keeping your pets with you at all times, is terrific for leveling. I strongly recommend it. It makes it a lot easier. This is maybe the easiest class to level up, simply because you can always have minions out. But it has a lot of other mechanics, including sacrificing your own damage to yourself to do damage to targets, taking conditions from friends, sending conditions to monsters. It also has the Shroud mechanic, basically changing you to sort of an undead being yourself for a period of time. And they have the separate life bar. You have your regular morale, your regular life bar, and if you swap into Shroud, you have a life force bar that slowly decreases over time and as you take damage. But it makes it a very, very sturdy class, so it's a great one to start for a new character. The three elites on that are Reaper, which changes it into a mostly melee class with really large spike damage, especially for large numbers of mobs. He has, for instance, a spin attack that is just ludicrous amounts of damage to large numbers of targets. But it is a melee class. That is a negative. Most of the time, given that this is a light armor class, being melee, if you're solo play, that can be dangerous. The second elite spec for this was the Scourge. Just recently, it got some nerfs, some definitely needed nerfs, as it was probably the strongest spec in the game, even stronger than Firebrand Guardian. It has the ability to do range damage, but also significant buffs to friends and itself, especially with shields. The third one, the new one, is the Harbinger. DPS and buffing for the most part. It is a pistol class. It does not have the Shroud bar. Instead, when you go into Shroud for this one, you actually start losing life. So they changed the mechanic on it. It is a lot glassier than the other Necromancer specs, but has some really fun effects and can do a lot of condition damage. Elementalist, the classic mage. The primary stat for them is their attunement for 4 elements: fire, earth, air, water. Again, this is another class. Engineer and Elementalist are the only class they can't swap weapons. The Engineer can swap in kits to change all of the skills they have. The Elementalist changes their attunement. And so if you have a staff and you have 5 fire skills because you're in fire attunement, and you switch to water, all of a sudden you have water skills. Now you're doing healing and some damage. And you switch to earth, and now you're a lot tougher and you're doing damage, but you're buffing your friend's defenses. So that's their class mechanic. The first, I should also point out that historically this is, a lot of people are going to take Elementalist because it sounds like a wizard from any number of other games. It's not a DPS first core build. It has a lot of flexibility. It is glassy, and it can be painful to level up because the joke is that their specialization is downstate. When it's played well, especially in a couple of the classes I'm about to hit or the specializations I'm about to talk to, it requires a lot of key presses. A lot. The first elite spec came out was Tempest. It's basically a lot like the core with some added ability to basically form up a very large tempest of your skill, like a flaming tornado, for instance. It isn't really any more complicated than the core, but has some additional hard-hitting elements to it. The next one is the Weaver. The Weaver, I would say, has the highest skill cap in the game. A friend of mine plays it very effectively and had noted that it has 54 separate steps in the optimized gameplay loop. 54. Do this, do this, do this, do this. 54 times. Then back. So, the skill cap on that is extremely high on the Weaver. But it is also capable of doing, if not the very highest damage in the game, right up there. But you have to be very good at it. The third one is the newest one, Catalyst. It came in, was in a pretty okay place. They nerfed the hell out of it. Everyone joked that the Elementalists, once again, are downstate. They then buffed it, and I think it's a little better than it was at launch. They changed some of the mechanics, and I think they're significantly better. It's one that people are trying to get a good grip on. It seems like it's going to be good in the long run. Keep in mind, these have only been out for a while. But right now, again, it is an Elementalist spec, and people look at them a little bit side-eyed for endgame content because of their reputation. Lastly, we have Mesmer. Sort of an illusionist. What they do is they summon illusions to do attacks and keep mobs' attention on the illusions instead of on yourself. And that makes them pretty tough and durable, because if you've got a lot of illusions around, well, that's going to keep things' attention off of you. The first one of their specialist specs was Chronomancer. Does a lot of things with time. For instance, you go into a combat, mark yourself with time, in a place in time, run a bunch of your skills, they're all on cooldown, you take some damage, you press the button, you go back to your state at the marked place where all of your skills are still not on cooldown and your health is back where it started. Those sort of tricks are what Chronomancer does, playing with little time-based magics. The second one was Mirage. Mirage is in a very good place. It's a strong build. Its dodges aren't really dodges. Instead, they are evades. So you can't move with your dodges, but you can get the protection by having an evade for a certain amount of time. So any strike, instead of you getting out of it, you evade it and it misses you. The timing has to be a little better, but it works very well. It's very strong offensively as well. It's in a good place. And lastly, we have Virtuoso, which is the newest one that you saw me running around with, the mind blades over my head. It's a glass cannon. It does not have... you can cast the illusions, but the illusions, instead of turning into a clone to keep things' attention, instead will turn into the blades over your head. So you don't have the utility of having a whole bunch of clones of yourself running around keeping everything's attention. So you don't have the defensive elements that the other Mesmers have, but your offenses are better. So if you're playing with other players, playing Virtuoso can be very, very strong. I think it has the very top end damage right now. But when I talk about top end, I'm talking at the end game when you've got all of your gear set up and you're all buffed from your friends, and the monster has a whole bunch of debuffs on it. And so don't get too caught up in any claim of damage. Basically, you can get all the way to the end game just by playing. Just play the game as it's been presented to you. And that is going to cover about everything I wanted to cover. It's not a particularly organized layout, but I think I've communicated it out. Obviously, the most important decision to make is that you want to start. After that, pick a class, the one that sounded like fun, and then play the game. But go in aware that there are a lot of different things about Guild Wars 2 compared to a WoW, a Final Fantasy 14. Certain game systems have more in common with Elder Scrolls Online. I would say if you're an ESO player, you would find the transition a little bit less jarring. So that's Guild Wars 2 in a nutshell. I hope you found this informative in some way. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them below, especially on any technical elements. I know I had a little bit of voice in and out problem on my first video. Hopefully that's corrected, but I would still like to know. Anyway, I hope you found this of some utility, and I'm going to try to do a video every week or two. Knock on wood. But thank you for paying attention. If you made it this far, you're a hero. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.